My friends, good evening. We know a little more about the accident that killed the brother of the singer Julien Clerc last year on August 15, 2023. We're talking here about Gérard Leclerc, 71 years old, a female passenger who was with him, and that passenger's friend who was also with them. The Bureau of Economic Analysis report came out recently. Last year, I talked to you about it in a video I made while I was on vacation. I was on a remote island with satellite connection, terrible connection, and very little information. Even then, what was obvious was the video's point. Reaction to the news was that it was an unexpected entry into instrument flight conditions. Internet speed is very slow here. When I upload this video, practically the entire population won't have access to the internet for a little while. So what information was I able to gather? Well, at first I was told that there had been 30 deaths. I thought to myself that it was an ATR, that the guy was flying it. But actually, no, I managed to figure out that it was actually a DR 400. There were probably 3 people on board. We don't know because it crashed into the Loire marshes, and then of course it broke into several pieces. So we can't determine how many people were inside or locate them. So what can I tell you today, right now, about this? And how low does it go? It goes down to 800 feet. At what altitude was the plane? It was at 800 feet. So clearly we probably have, and I'm telling you, the investigation is just beginning. I'm giving you this information right away with a certainty rate of about 70 to 75%, but we'll refine this when the Bureau of Economic Analysis report comes out. We have, coincidentally, a cloud cover at 800 feet, and we have a plane descending to 800 feet. We're clearly in an avoidance mindset, trying to stay out of the clouds. So the pilot likely pulled back on the control stick suddenly. But why? Because, and this is a major killer in general aviation, my friends, it's probably because he unexpectedly entered the clouds. That's what we call an unexpected entry into instrument meteorological conditions. It's a major killer in general aviation. Today, the Bureau of Economic Analysis report confirms it. So we had this DR 400 type aircraft which took off from an airport. The airport, well, we're talking about very small airports here. Sorry, I have to read it. The water from a, I don't know how to pronounce it. If anyone local can help, it's Loudun. I won't try to read Loudun. Otherwise, I would have expected IN or something like that, right? And he was going to the bowl, following the law. The conditions at the time he left were already extremely average. He took off, so he headed towards clouds that were getting lower. And this will be translated a little bit or reflected by his altitude. At first, he starts at 2,000 feet, which isn't very, very high, but well, we understand. When you're flying visual flight rules, you generally don't climb very high, but here he's at 2,000 feet. He drops to 1,700, rises to 2,000, then plunges to 1,200 feet, and then he even goes below 1,000 feet. What was he doing? He had the kind of flight path of someone facing a wall of clouds who is descending, and he keeps going toward that wall. Usually, you'd say you have to turn back, but the Bureau of Economic Analysis often talks about fixation on the objective. That means someone who absolutely wants to go, who absolutely wants to get there. The National Transportation Safety Board similarly talks about people who stick to the original flight plan and mentions some interesting statistics. The National Transportation Safety Board conducted a study from 2003 to 2024. In 2004, that's about 20 years, they took 72 pilots who crashed under these conditions. That means they entered instrument meteorological conditions, flying by instruments. And then they lost control and they died. And what they did was they looked for pilots who were flying in the same area at the same time. And they found 135. They asked them if they would like to come and talk to the National Transportation Safety Board as well. That is to say, the intelligence of this study, which I'm also giving you as a download in the video description, is that it wants to avoid bias. Because quite simply, if we only study crashed planes, we'll end up with statistics. But these statistics don't mean anything if we don't have what's called a baseline, if we don't have a line of comparison to study them. So they found a line of comparison, pilots who were flying in the same region, who hadn't crashed, and they discovered some pretty interesting things. One of the first factors they discovered was the age of the captain, the age of the pilots. In general, older pilots tend to end up in these kinds of situations more often. But then why? Why? Of course, there are people who will say, well, he's old, so he was getting senile. So that's not necessary. It's not necessarily that. It's not always a problem related to senility. He's 71 years old. Honestly, we're not there yet. On the other hand, the AFA gives an interesting indication. The AFA's indication says this. When pilots are older, they sometimes have the impression that they're right. We're going to rely on them more. They feel like they have to deliver a performance based on very strong confidence that they have to project, that they always have to be there, always perform. And they're the ones who put that on themselves. They're the ones who set that bar in their minds. No one is imposing it on them. But on a social level, they have that impression. A 19 or 20-year-old pilot might not have any qualms about telling the people who are with him, listen, guys, I don't feel good about this. I'm a bit nervous. Let's go back. Let's turn around. He might not have a problem saying that. Whereas a pilot who is 71 years old might be more reluctant, right, to use that kind of language and will tend to keep calm and continue until it's too late. There's a study from 1993 based on research that is even older. We're discussing the 1950s, focusing on inexperienced pilots. They had them fly a Bonanza-type aircraft, and they saw how long they would survive in instrument flight conditions. The numbers from that time show values ranging from 20 seconds to 8 minutes. They settled on an average time that was repeated, that was hammered into people. Generations of pilots, 178 seconds pilots were told, if you enter instrument meteorological conditions by mistake, your average survival time is 178 seconds. So sharing these numbers is a good thing. And it's not good, as they say. It's a double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, yes, on the one hand, it's very important to tell people not to have any illusions if you go into low-altitude clouds. Well, when you don't have the training to fly by instruments, when your plane isn't capable, you can't fly by instruments. That it was something that wasn't planned, that wasn't scheduled, all that. Your chances of survival are extremely limited. People need to know this. You have to be realistic about it. Your life is at risk in this kind of situation. Still, CC, that's the double-edged sword. Unfortunately, CC, this has led to many pilots, when they find themselves in these situations, maybe tending to give up all hope because they tell themselves, the statistics are against me, and in the situation I'm in, there's really no way out for me. So Mr. Leclerc, what he did was, he took off, like I said, but started losing altitude, probably because the clouds were chasing him. At that time, we were talking about a ceiling of 3,000 feet, and he was flying at 2,000. When we say 3,000 feet, it's just between us. Locally, clouds aren't always a flat layer. They rise, fall, and have their own dynamics. So at some point, he feels the need to lower his altitude to get out of it. And the problem is that these ones, unfortunately, they come from the air. So if there are clouds at 6,000 feet and we descend to 3,000 to avoid them, I understand. But when we're already at altitudes that start with a 1, when we are at 1,700 feet, and we still feel the obligation or the need to go even lower, it means we're slowly reaching the end of a system. Because going lower and lower, there's the ground, but it's not just the ground. The ground isn't necessarily the limit. We'll talk about that in a second. Sometimes the problem is that we might have a hill coming toward us, and that makes things worse. We might have high voltage lines, chimneys, factories, and similar structures. And at some point, there really isn't any limit anymore. We're heading straight for a wall. The horizon blends with the cloud, and those could potentially reach all the way to the ground. There are sometimes, often even when there are clouds and precipitation, the visibility decreases in the precipitation. And you can quite quickly lose sight of the ground, lose sight of the horizon. And then after a while, you don't really know where you are anymore. So, of course, there are the instruments, but these instruments still require training, require specific instruction, and also require a planned flight. Flights that are done using instruments are not flights that take off by sight. Suddenly they end up in the clouds and say, since I'm here, let's fly by instruments. That's not how it works. These flights are planned to use instruments from the start. It's not the same challenge, it's not the same journey. So, Mr. Leclerc, at some point when we look at it for you, to give you a bit of an idea of the weather there, there's a chimney, there's a power plant in the area. It's a few kilometers from where the incident happened, isn't it? But the site of the accident is within the camera's field of view, even if it couldn't record. Because quite simply, it takes a picture, a photo every 2 minutes. It gives us an idea, a little bit, of the weather at that time. So we see the Loire, we see the river flowing away from the camera's field of view, and we see the clouds coming down. We have a layer of stratus, probably with other types of clouds as well. It's August, possibly with convective clouds mixed in, causing turbulence and disturbances. And actually, we can see them coming down, going to meet the river. So when we get into situations like this, you have to make that damn turn back. You have to think about it at some point. And over there, many people don't think about it and keep going until the moment when the plane, if we look at the last one, you should know that it doesn't have a black box. This kind of plane doesn't have a black box, doesn't have a flight recorder. In very precarious cases, finding chips is nearly impossible because they're equipped with computer systems, cards that scroll, all that. There are more and more gadgets in these planes. Sometimes there are even iPads which can have non-volatile memories. And the Bureau of Economic Analysis, their job is to recover them, to dig into them, to find the data. I'm not talking about the iPads, but the rest. They know how to recover data, and in this case they did. But it's something that doesn't actually give much more information about this accident than what we already know. If we look at this device, it goes to the middle of the river. This path in the middle of the river isn't there by chance. This path is telling us something. Why? Because when we're in a pre-catastrophic situation, we're in control. And then suddenly we find ourselves surrounded by clouds. We can barely see the ground. Well, what do we do? What is it? Where do we find it? Salvation somewhere. If we decide to keep going, which isn't recommended, but where is it? Salvation. Salvation is often found near water. Why? Because bodies of water, well, they don't have any roughness. They don't have any chimneys. For example, just the power plant that the camera was filming is over 700 feet tall, just to give you an idea, an extremely tall chimney. So the fact that it went toward the middle of the river is telling us something. It's potentially telling us that it felt trapped by the clouds, and so it decided to go toward the river. Because that's where there's the least risk of hitting obstacles. I heard about a Corsair pilot in Switzerland back when it still existed. What did he do? There was a Vore that was in the middle of a lake in Switzerland. The country, there are a lot of lakes in that country. And actually, this pilot was doing something absolutely, it's grotesque, but well, he was doing it anyway. And what he was doing was flying over the lake. He's in the clouds, or even above the clouds. So he goes vertically above the lake, which he locates with this omnidirectional beacon, the VOR. And actually what he does is he starts making circles to descend. See, to descend until he is below the cloud base. And then at that moment, he's above the lake. And the fact that there was the lake guaranteed him that he wouldn't run into any obstacles. So he was someone who had developed this kind of method. In fact, he died crashing a commercial airliner on approach in Zurich. That was where his luck unfortunately ran out. So, as I was saying, Mr. Leclerc's plane ended up in the middle of the river. Indeed, because he was trying to find a somewhat safe place. He lowers his altitude more and more, but probably not enough to stay out of the clouds. In those cases, if you really want to persist and keep going, let's go cheerfully, let's go. Literally until the end. The tires touch the water if necessary. It's because I'm not advocating for that. But I mean, at some point, if we absolutely have to do stupid things, let's go all the way. But here, unfortunately, he's going to stay a little shy. He's not going to go as low as he needed to in order to get below the clouds. I'm not even assuming that there was an altitude at which he could have escaped. The clouds might have touched the water just 2 kilometers ahead. At that point, it's game over. So he enters the clouds at some point and then he starts a right turn. He is going to start a right turn. It's not, it's a turn. What can we say about this turn? There are several explanations. The first possible explanation is that he's there. Suddenly everything turns white. The canopy turns white. He's in the clouds. And maybe it's at that moment that he decides to turn back. That's when he tells himself it's high time to turn around. So he tilts his aircraft. And when you don't have the training, and he didn't have it, when you don't have the training, the preparation to do this kind of thing. Honestly, many accidents still happen to pilots who are instrument flight rules or instrument flight certified. And so he goes in there, he tilts his plane. And at that moment, that's it. At that moment, he's betrayed by his senses. Because that's the problem. It's that our senses, when we're in that situation, especially when you add stress, the guy gradually takes on a heavy responsibility. As the conditions get worse, there's a worry, there's a stress that builds up. He misstates the frequency once. This likely indicates a debate or a situation where emotions start to intensify. He contacts a tower while he's on the wrong frequency. He was supposed to contact another controller. He's talking to the wrong controller, right? And that was just a few minutes before the tragedy. And so he gets in there, he bows. And from that, what we know for sure is that the variometer started showing 3,000 feet per minute, 3,000 feet per minute. That's not a performance that the DR400 can sustain over time. What does that mean? It means he's in a situation where he's trading altitude for speed. He tilted the plane, which happens often. Some people even break theirs doing this. He pulled on the stick. Because many people think, or they feel like they're falling, because they're tilting too much. They feel like they're dropping, and in response, they pull on the stick. They're panicking, so they pull on the stick. Or some people at that moment think, if I pull, I'll get above the clouds in a way, so they pull. Except that's not guaranteed, because the clouds can go extremely high. So he ends up at over 3,000 feet per minute under ST, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, no more. But as long as he manages to do it for 20 seconds, that gives us the a third of a minute. 3,000 feet. It can take 1,000 feet, depending on the speed he had when he was horizontal. It's almost doable. Depending on the throttle too, it's almost doable. But it won't be much more. A recovery. He climbs, and what is he going to do at that moment? I think in his case, he didn't even reach 1,000 feet. He did much less, just a few hundred feet. He climbs, and from there, he has no more speed. The plane enters a zone. This time it stalls and then heads back toward the ground. When he heads back toward the ground, we're at minus 7,500 feet per minute. Extremely high speed is typical here. Remember, there's a similar case on this channel. A guy in a Pilatus with his family. And at that moment, he was in instrument meteorological conditions in the clouds. The autopilot lets go for a reason that was never able to be determined. The guy makes abrupt movements, breaking the plane in flight. The wing breaks, hits, and tears open the cabin. And there are people from his family who jumped into the air, right? Before the plane crashes, he doesn't actually wipe everyone out. So these are extremely serious situations that can turn the plane from a cozy, pleasant, friendly place and all that into a nightmare. That could make it the worst place on Earth. You'd wish you'd never been born rather than end up in those situations. 7,500 feet per minute descent rate. Of course, there are accelerations coming. There's noise. There's a lot of noise. It's an aerobatic plane. You can hear it very well. When there's that acceleration, you can hear it. There's an impressive rush of air when the speed increases. The air hits the canopy, and that's it. And with that, you can imagine the plane bursts out from under the clouds. The problem is, when you burst out from under the clouds in desperate situations like this, it means the plane, probably the nose, is pointed way below the horizon at an extremely high speed with a descent rate of 7,500 feet per minute. So if it bursts out appearing at 600 feet, because the clouds were estimated at 600 feet, basically that's not much time, 600 feet at 7,500 feet per minute, we can imagine that, roughly speaking, I don't have a calculator on hand right now, but we're talking about something like 5 seconds still. That means between the moment it comes out from under the clouds and the moment it hits, it's 5 seconds. That means even if he regains visual references, but to catch up with them like that, to catch up in 5 seconds, that means this kind of plane is in a desperate situation. We can catch up with them. Not that we can't, but not in 500 feet, not in 600 feet. Usually we can catch up with them, but we go easily. Good or bad, we're going to lose 1,000, 1,500 feet pretty easily in such desperate situations. And still, we can lose even more. So 600 feet, he doesn't have time to do much. You give a little nudge on the aileron and then you're dead. A good part of the plane, in fact, was never found. They found the engine and some parts that were washed up on the shore as people picked them up. But you see, it's very characteristic. It's an accident that happens so often. What did the National Transportation Safety Board say? I have a document that I'll show you online. It provides a number of details. The BE also said the same thing, the continuation. I want to continue with the initial plan. I want to continue with the initial plan, and I don't have a plan B. IB, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, describes this condition of continuing the plan. How long does this happen? In 75% of accidents, I will stick to the plan no matter what. So to finish this video, if I may give a piece of advice, well, I'm not here to give advice. You'll notice that in most videos, there isn't any advice. I present the issues to you, I give you the lessons that have been learned, but I don't feel I have any special license to give advice to anyone. But if I may, I think we can get out of those situations with a briefing that always includes a plan B. Let's just say we're going to play a role-playing game. We're going to start now. We're going to head out quickly. We have a DR 400 that's parked. We're at the cafeteria. We're going to talk to the passengers. No matter the weather, let's imagine it's good or bad or average, it doesn't matter. But I decide to go. That's it. So we have weather along the way that's not as good as I would have liked. You look around the area, it's never very good, so we're going to leave. I checked with the weather, so I think we can go. However, there is a residual risk that we might have to turn back. That's something that could happen. So I'm telling you right now. That way, if we ever have to turn back during the flight, don't be surprised or worried. Our lunch at La Bolle is still on. I spoke to Michel, his brother-in-law, and he can drive us. He has nothing to do. He's at home. He told me that if I ever need him, I just call and he'll be there in 20 minutes. So I have a plan B that he could potentially set in motion. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave. And so there you go. I prefer to warn you that today there's still a possibility that we might turn back. Why are we saying this? We're saying this to take off the psychological pressure, to take it off ourselves, and we even prepare our passengers. Then we take off, we're in flight, and we see that things start to go down. We see a V like this, a sort of funnel that closes in, going down to the ground. We look at the passengers, we're going to tell them, yeah, did you see that? They say, yeah, it's nothing, because you shouldn't believe it. The passengers are reasonable, even if they lack pilot qualifications, but the majority are still people who aren't lacking in common sense. Often common sense, sometimes lacking in highly specialized countries, helps solve these issues. We'll tell them, guys, we're going to turn around. Okay, they'll say, yes, yes, turn around. Okay, turn around. And we turn around and come back. Since it was prepared, we have no qualms about doing it. We don't feel embarrassed or anything. We return, land, and the passengers are happy. Michel waits with his Tesla, and we leave. It's just as simple as that, you see. That's it. That's C. But let's imagine that the conditions are good, continuous. We're still flying, so we tell the passengers. It's still good anyway. I thought it was going to be bad, but in the end, it's better than we thought. We arrive at the right place, and that's it. But preparing, talking, and having a plan B always helps reduce pressure. Many people died. Widows, orphans, and friends. There are still many cases I haven't mentioned. Maybe I should do a series on this topic. Because they didn't have a plan B. We made a reservation. We have a booking. We have people waiting for us. We have a surprise. We have something. And we don't have a plan B. So I have to go. That's what kills, unfortunately. The other factors they mentioned are the induced pressure. People put pressure on themselves, and the commercial pressure for people when money is involved. like people who are paid for a service. All that, we don't want to let it go because they're clients. We can't let them down. We don't want to end up having to pay back money that we've maybe already spent on other things and all that. Overconfidence, ego, you know what I mean? And then sometimes it's just situational awareness. People, they just don't have a sense of the situation. I mean, they're just standing there smiling like that. Heading toward a Charlie Brown, heading toward Cumulonimbus, or heading towards something terrible. Often you don't realize it until it's too late and the trap has sprung. In any case, 3 people died that day. It was August 15, 2023. The reason is unexpected entry into instrument flight conditions. Thank you for watching. So is coming. In any case, 3 people died that day. It was August 15, 2023. And then the reason was an unexpected entry into instrument flight conditions. Thank you for watching this video up to this point.